Imagine living in a world where every part of you is accepted, where your strengths, weaknesses, and everything in between are embraced. What if the key to unlocking your true potential lies not in avoiding your darkest parts, but in facing them head-on? In a journey that may be uncomfortable, even painful at times, lies a profound power. The ability to reclaim the pieces of yourself that you've hidden away for far too long. Carl Jung, the brilliant psychologist, understood this truth deeply. He believed that the path to self-discovery and inner wholeness isn't through perfection, but through the integration of our shadows, the hidden, often rejected parts of ourselves that hold the very keys to our personal growth, creativity, and healing. In today's exploration, we'll uncover why Jung believed that embracing your shadow is not just necessary, but transformative. We'll dive deep into the hidden gifts lying within the darkness and how facing these parts can unlock the freedom, power, and authenticity you've been searching for. This isn't just about understanding yourself better. It's about becoming whole, stepping into your fullest expression, and finally embracing who you truly are. The journey ahead might challenge you, but it will lead you to a life of deeper connection, clarity, and strength. Ready to meet the parts of you that have been waiting to be seen? Let's begin. Most people walk through life believing they know who they are. They carry a name, a background, a set of beliefs and habits they call their own. But according to Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, much of who we are remains hidden, buried deep in the unconscious mind. Jung believed that self-discovery isn't about adding more to ourselves. It's about turning inward and facing the parts we've avoided, denied, or forgotten. This journey, he said, begins when we open the door to the unknown within us, and behind that door lies what he called the shadow. The unknown in Jungian psychology isn't just mystery, it's a reflection of what we refuse to see. When we begin to explore our inner world, we don't just find peace and light. We uncover contradictions, shame, suppressed desires, guilt, anger, envy, all the parts of ourselves that don't fit the story we want to tell about who we are. Jung didn't believe this darkness should be feared or destroyed. He believed it should be understood and embraced. Only then, he said, could a person become whole. But let's pause for a moment. Why would anyone want to look at the dark parts of themselves? Isn't life already difficult enough without digging up painful feelings or past mistakes? For Jung, the answer was clear. If we don't face the darkness, it controls us. The things we refuse to confront inside ourselves begin to shape our lives without our awareness. They show up as addictions, anger, depression, failed relationships, and a deep sense of emptiness. So instead of running from the shadow, Jung encouraged us to meet it with courage. Most people fear this idea. They associate darkness with evil or weakness. But Jung offered a more compassionate and profound understanding. The shadow isn't evil, it's human. It's made up of everything we've had to hide in order to survive or be accepted. Think of a child who's told not to cry because it's a sign of weakness. Over time, they learn to suppress their feelings. But that doesn't make the sadness or fear disappear. It just gets pushed into the unconscious. The shadow is the emotional storage room of the psyche, and sooner or later, what we store there starts leaking out in ways we can't control. This is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This one sentence sums up why facing the unknown is so crucial. The parts of ourselves we refuse to see don't go away. They influence how we react, what we fear, how we treat others, and how we see the world. And unless we face them, we remain prisoners of our own inner darkness. But there's a deeper purpose behind this exploration. Jung didn't believe we're meant to stay broken or fragmented. He believed the ultimate goal of life is individuation, a process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, including the shadow. And this process always begins with awareness. Once we become aware of what we've hidden, we start to regain control. We begin to understand why we behave the way we do, why certain people trigger us, why we sabotage our own success, or struggle with self-worth. Facing the unknown is never easy. It requires honesty, humility, and the willingness to feel discomfort. But it's also incredibly freeing. When we bring light to the darkness, it loses its power over us. We begin to act with intention instead of impulse. We respond instead of react. And we develop a deeper compassion, not just for ourselves, but for others, because we realize we all carry a shadow. So this first step, opening the door to the unknown, is not just the beginning of self-discovery. It is an act of inner bravery. It means deciding that the truth, no matter how painful or confusing, is better than the illusion of perfection. It means choosing depth over comfort, and most importantly, it means becoming the author of your own story, rather than a character shaped by unconscious fears and hidden wounds. Carl Jung believed that the darkness inside us isn't the enemy, it's the guide, and by opening the door to it, we begin the journey back to ourselves. Most people walk through life believing they know who they are. They carry a name, a background, a set of beliefs and habits they call their own. But according to Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, much of who we are remains hidden, buried deep in the unconscious mind. Jung believed that self-discovery isn't about adding more to ourselves. It's about turning inward and facing the parts we've avoided, denied, or forgotten. This journey, he said, begins when we open the door to the unknown within us. And behind that door lies what he called the shadow. The unknown in Jungian psychology isn't just mystery, it's a reflection of what we refuse to see. When we begin to explore our inner world, we don't just find peace and light. We uncover contradictions, shame, suppressed desires, guilt, anger, envy, all the parts of ourselves that don't fit the story we want to tell about who we are. Jung didn't believe this darkness should be feared or destroyed. He believed it should be understood and embraced. Only then, he said, could a person become whole. But let's pause for a moment. Why would anyone want to look at the dark parts of themselves? Isn't life already difficult enough without digging up painful feelings or past mistakes? For Jung, the answer was clear. If we don't face the darkness, it controls us. The things we refuse to confront inside ourselves begin to shape our lives without our awareness. They show up as addictions, anger, depression, failed relationships, and a deep sense of emptiness. So instead of running from the shadow, Jung encouraged us to meet it with courage. Most people fear this idea. They associate darkness with evil or weakness. But Jung offered a more compassionate and profound understanding. The shadow isn't evil, it's human. It's made up of everything we've had to hide in order to survive or be accepted. Think of a child who's told not to cry because it's a sign of weakness. Over time, they learn to suppress their feelings. But that doesn't make the sadness or fear disappear. It just gets pushed into the unconscious. The shadow is the emotional storage room of the psyche, and sooner or later, what we store there starts leaking out in ways we can't control. This is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This one sentence sums up why facing the unknown is so crucial. The parts of ourselves we refuse to see don't go away. They influence how we react, what we fear, how we treat others, and how we see the world. And unless we face them, we remain prisoners of our own inner darkness. But there's a deeper purpose behind this exploration. Jung didn't believe we're meant to stay broken or fragmented. He believed the ultimate goal of life is individuation, a process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, including the shadow. And this process always begins with awareness. Once we become aware of what we've hidden, we start to regain control. We begin to understand why we behave the way we do, why certain people trigger us, why we sabotage our own success, or struggle with self-worth. Facing the unknown is never easy. It requires honesty, humility, and the willingness to feel discomfort. But it's also incredibly freeing. When we bring light to the darkness, it loses its power over us. We begin to act with intention instead of impulse. We respond instead of react. And we develop a deeper compassion, not just for ourselves, but for others, because we realize we all carry a shadow. So this first step, opening the door to the unknown, is not just the beginning of self-discovery. It is an act of inner bravery. It means deciding that the truth, no matter how painful or confusing, is better than the illusion of perfection. It means choosing depth over comfort, and most importantly, it means becoming the author of your own story, rather than a character shaped by unconscious fears and hidden wounds. Carl Jung believed that the darkness inside us isn't the enemy, it's the guide, and by opening the door to it, we begin the journey back to ourselves. Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, born in 1875. He began his career as a close collaborator of Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis. But as time went on, Jung's ideas began to diverge sharply from Freud's. While Freud focused primarily on the unconscious as a place of repressed sexuality and instinct, Jung saw it as a much deeper and more mysterious part of the human psyche. He believed that the unconscious held the key not just to our neuroses, but to our spiritual growth and self-realization. Jung introduced many ideas that have become foundational in psychology, philosophy, and even modern self-help. Concepts like the shadow, the persona, anima and animus, archetypes, synchronicity, and individuation all came from his work. But what makes Jung so enduring, why he still matters even today, is the depth with which he understood human nature. He didn't just want to fix symptoms. He wanted to understand the soul. Unlike Freud, who believed that our early experiences and repressed desires shaped our entire psychological life, Jung believed there was a collective unconscious shared by all human beings. This was not a mystical belief, but a psychological insight. The collective unconscious, he said, is filled with ancient symbols and patterns of behavior called archetypes. These show up in myths, dreams, art, and religion across cultures and time periods. According to Jung, understanding these archetypes helps us understand ourselves. But what truly set Jung apart was his view of the self. He believed that every person has a deep inner drive toward wholeness, not perfection, wholeness. That means embracing all parts of ourselves, the good, the bad, the known, and the hidden. At the center of this process is what he called individuation. This is the lifelong psychological journey of becoming who you truly are, beyond the masks you wear or the roles society gives you. And this is where Jung becomes especially relevant today. In a world obsessed with image, achievement, and social approval, many people feel disconnected from their true selves. Anxiety, depression, and emptiness are widespread. People are chasing success but still feel unfulfilled. Jung would say this is because they are cut off from the deeper parts of their psyche. They have not met their shadow. They have not begun the process of individuation. They are living through a persona, a social mask, rather than their authentic self. Jung's work offers a path back to meaning. He didn't believe in quick fixes or surface-level positivity. He believed in deep inner work, facing your fears, understanding your patterns, interpreting your dreams, and listening to the quiet voice of your inner self. His work encouraged people to go beyond ego and connect with something larger, their soul. It's also worth noting that Jung had a strong respect for spirituality. but not in a religious or dogmatic way. He believed that true spirituality was about inner experience, the kind that comes from dreams, intuition, and deep reflection. He saw religion, myth, and symbols as languages of the unconscious. They weren't just stories, they were maps of the inner world. That's one reason Jung's theories have influenced not just psychologists, but artists, writers, philosophers, and even filmmakers. Movies like Fight Club, Black Swan, or The Lion King are filled with Jungian themes: the hero's journey, the confrontation with the shadow, the transformation of the self. All these are rooted in Jung's ideas. His work reminds us that the human mind is not just a machine, it's a mystery. And to understand ourselves, we must be willing to explore the darkness as well as the light. So why does Carl Jung still matter? Because his insights speak to a universal human experience: the struggle to find meaning, the fear of facing ourselves, and the longing to become whole. In a world full of distractions and noise, Jung invites us to turn inward, to listen to the quiet symbols of the unconscious, and to begin the courageous journey of truly knowing who we are. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a hidden side, a darker, unconscious part of the psyche that he called the shadow. This isn't just a poetic metaphor, it's a psychological reality that lives within all of us. The shadow contains everything we don't want to be, everything we're ashamed of, and everything we've pushed away from our conscious identity. But far from being something evil or to be feared, Jung saw the shadow as essential to understanding ourselves. He believed that we cannot become whole until we face and integrate this dark twin within. To understand the shadow, think about your personality like a house. The rooms you show your guests are your conscious self, your polite behavior, your strengths, your kindness. But what about the messy attic or the locked basement? That's where the shadow lives. It's made up of traits we've rejected: jealousy, anger, selfishness, laziness, arrogance, fear, or even deep sadness. These traits might not be inherently bad, but because they don't match the image we want to present to the world, we hide them. The formation of the shadow often begins in childhood. As we grow up, we learn which behaviors are acceptable and which are not. A child who is punished for expressing anger may learn to suppress it completely. A girl who is told to always be quiet and sweet might bury her assertiveness. A boy who's told that crying is weak might push down all emotional vulnerability. Slowly, these rejected parts of ourselves get buried in the unconscious. They don't disappear, they just go into hiding, becoming part of the shadow. But here's the crucial part. Just because these traits are unconscious doesn't mean they're inactive. In fact, they influence us every day through our emotional reactions, our relationships, our judgments of others, and our deepest fears. When we see someone we dislike, it's often because they reflect a part of our own shadow that we haven't acknowledged. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." The shadow doesn't only contain negative traits, it also holds suppressed talents, creative energy, and potential we've ignored because of fear, shame, or social pressure. Maybe you were told you weren't smart enough to be a writer or brave enough to speak your truth, so you buried that voice. Maybe you feared rejection if you showed your real emotions, so you learned to wear a mask. The shadow is not just where our darkness lives, it's where our unlived life hides too. But ignoring the shadow doesn't make it go away. In fact, when the shadow is ignored for too long, it tends to erupt in destructive ways. This is when we act out of character, explode in anger, sabotage our own success, or fall into depression or addiction. It can also show up in projection, when we blame others for the very things we deny in ourselves. A person who denies their own selfishness might constantly accuse others of being greedy. Someone who represses their own sexuality might become overly judgmental of others' behavior. These unconscious projections are the shadow's way of demanding to be seen. Jung believed that the goal is not to destroy the shadow, but to integrate it. This means becoming aware of it, accepting that it exists, and finding a healthy way to express its energy. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean becoming aggressive, selfish, or cruel. It means recognizing that those impulses exist within you and learning how to work with them consciously. When you integrate your anger, for example, it becomes assertiveness. When you integrate your fear, it becomes wisdom. When you face your shame, it becomes humility. This process takes courage. It's not easy to admit to parts of ourselves we've been taught to hide, but there is tremendous power in doing so. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Only by meeting our shadow face to face can we truly begin to understand who we are and reclaim the parts of ourselves we've lost along the way. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It shows you where you are wounded, where you've been silenced, and where you've been afraid to grow. And when you begin to explore it, not with judgment, but with curiosity, you unlock the doorway to your true self. The shadow, as Carl Jung defined it, is not just a random collection of dark or negative traits. It is a carefully constructed, unconscious part of the psyche, built over time through experiences, conditioning, and emotional responses. What lives inside it are the very pieces of ourselves that we were taught to reject, fear, or suppress. These include not only unacceptable behaviors, but also powerful emotions, hidden desires, and unfulfilled dreams. The shadow is personal, yet deeply shaped by the culture, family, and society we grow up in. To understand what lives in the shadow, we first have to look at the process of repression. From a young age, we begin learning what is considered good and bad. We are rewarded for following rules, being polite, and staying in line. But when we express emotions that are inconvenient, like rage, jealousy, sadness, or even confidence in certain environments, we're often told to tone them down or hide them altogether. Slowly we start building an inner wall, hiding the parts of us that aren't approved by others. Jung believed that this repression doesn't erase the energy behind those traits. It simply stores them in the unconscious. Imagine all the times you wanted to cry but didn't. All the times you felt jealous or insecure but pretended everything was fine. All of that emotional weight gets locked away in the shadow. Over time, this creates an emotional pressure that starts to leak out in passive-aggressive behavior, irritability, or self-sabotage. Desires are also a major part of the shadow. These are not only sexual desires, which Freud heavily focused on, but also ambitions and needs that conflict with how we've been taught to behave. For example, a person raised in a strict religious household may repress their desire for freedom or self-expression. Someone raised to be overly humble may hide a deep hunger for recognition or power. These desires don't disappear. They become hidden motivators that drive behavior from behind the scenes. Fears also take root in the shadow. These might be fears we've never voiced. Fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of abandonment, or even fear of our own power. Sometimes we bury our courage or independence because we're afraid of standing out. Or we fear our own anger, so we become overly passive. In trying to keep ourselves safe or acceptable, we exile parts of ourselves that are actually essential to our growth. There's another element in the shadow that many people overlook: pain. Emotional wounds from childhood or traumatic experiences often get buried deep. These may be memories we don't want to revisit or feelings we couldn't handle at the time. Rather than processing them, we stuff them away. But they don't go quietly. They shape how we see ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we respond to stress or conflict. Unhealed pain becomes part of the shadow's core. Jung also pointed out that the shadow is often filled with qualities that don't seem dark at all, but simply didn't fit the mold we were placed in. For example, a man taught to be tough and emotionless may bury his sensitivity and empathy. A woman raised to always serve others might repress her assertiveness and leadership. In this way, the shadow contains not just our bad traits, but also some of our greatest strengths, ones that were never given the chance to develop. This is why the shadow is so rich and complex. It's not just a dumpster of bad emotions, it's a treasure chest of lost pieces of the soul. It contains the raw material of who we could become if we were whole. Jung saw this clearly. The shadow is not the enemy of growth. It is the gatekeeper. It holds the very qualities we need in order to evolve. But the longer we ignore the contents of the shadow, the more control it has over us. We may find ourselves stuck in the same patterns, reacting in ways we don't understand. We're feeling a constant sense of dissatisfaction. We might sabotage our relationships, feel creatively blocked, or carry chronic guilt or shame. All of these are signs that something in the shadow is asking to be seen. When we begin the work of self-reflection, therapy, journaling, or simply honest awareness, we start shining a light on what's been hidden. And what we often find is not a monster, but a younger version of ourselves who was hurt, silenced, or misunderstood. Facing what lives in the shadow is not about punishing yourself. It's about reclaiming your inner world. So the next time you feel triggered, jealous, angry, or ashamed, pause and ask, what part of me is trying to speak right now? The answer will likely lead you back to something long buried, waiting not to be feared, but finally understood. Shadow work is the conscious process of exploring and integrating the parts of yourself that you've rejected, ignored, or buried in your unconscious mind. Carl Jung believed this was one of the most important paths towards psychological growth and wholeness. It's not about fixing yourself, it's about becoming more honest and complete. The journey inward isn't always comfortable, but it is deeply rewarding. It allows you to reclaim energy, heal wounds, and finally see yourself clearly, not just as who you want to be, but as who you truly are. The first step in shadow work is self-observation. This means paying close attention to your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without immediately judging them. Notice what triggers you, what kinds of people upset you the most, what traits in others make you feel insecure, angry, or jealous. These emotional reactions are clues. They're like little smoke signals from your unconscious, trying to point out the parts of you that have been pushed into the shadow. Once you notice a pattern, the next step is to reflect. Ask yourself, why did that bother me so much? Or, what does this situation say about me? At first, it may be uncomfortable. You might realize that your frustration with others comes from qualities you also have, or that your self-doubt is tied to something unresolved from the past. But don't rush to judge yourself. The goal is understanding, not shame. Jung emphasized the importance of accepting what you find in the shadow, not as good or bad, but simply as part of you. Journaling is a powerful tool in this process. Writing down your thoughts and triggers helps you separate from them and see patterns more clearly. You can try prompts like, what part of me do I hide from others? When was the last time I felt irrationally angry or jealous? What was beneath that feeling? Who do I dislike and why? Could that person be reflecting something in me? Meditation can also help in shadow work. By sitting in stillness, you create space for the unconscious to rise. Thoughts and feelings you've been avoiding may come up. Instead of pushing them away, just observe them. The more you make room for what's hidden, the less control it has over you. Dream analysis is another Jungian method. Jung believed dreams are a direct channel to the unconscious. pay attention to symbols, emotions, and recurring characters in your dreams. Often your shadow will appear in disguise, maybe as a frightening figure, a rejected friend, or a chaotic situation. These aren't random, they're expressions of your inner world, trying to communicate. Another crucial part of shadow work is owning your projections. This means taking responsibility when you recognize that your reactions to others might actually be reflections of yourself. It's hard to admit that the traits we criticize might be inside us too, but this is where deep healing begins. When you stop blaming and start exploring, you gain control over your responses and begin to grow. Forgiveness is also part of shadow work, not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself. Much of what lives in the shadow is linked to past mistakes, regrets, or pain you weren't ready to face. As you bring these into awareness, treat yourself with compassion. You were doing the best you could with what you knew at the time. Healing happens when we can look at our darkness and say, I see you, I understand, and I choose to move forward. You don't have to do shadow work alone. Therapy, especially Jungian or depth psychotherapy, can provide a safe space for exploring your inner world. Talking to someone trained to guide this process can make it more structured and less overwhelming. But whether you do it alone or with help, the most important thing is to begin with honesty and courage. Shadow work isn't a quick fix. It's a lifelong practice of becoming more whole, more present, and more human. The deeper you go, the more layers you uncover, not just of pain, but of strength, creativity, and power you didn't know you had. The shadow, once faced, stops being something to fear and becomes a source of insight, transformation, and authenticity. In Jung's words, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Shadow work is how you earn that privilege, not by chasing perfection, but by embracing every part of yourself, especially the ones you were taught to hide. You don't need to be in therapy or deep meditation to meet your shadow. It shows up every single day through your triggers, arguments, defensiveness, and emotional reactions. According to Jung, the shadow is always operating in the background, subtly shaping how you feel, speak, and act. The key is learning to recognize its presence in the ordinary moments of your life. Once you do, everyday experiences become opportunities for self-discovery and healing. One of the most direct ways the shadow reveals itself is through emotional triggers. A trigger is a strong, often disproportionate emotional response to something. For example, if someone gives you constructive feedback and you instantly feel insulted or angry, that's not just about the feedback, it's about a deeper wound being touched. Maybe your shadow holds a fear of being seen as a failure or a belief that you're not good enough. The intensity of your response is a sign that something unconscious is being activated. Jung emphasized that emotional overreactions are never random. They are clues. When something small feels huge, when you feel deeply hurt, enraged, or ashamed over a comment, a look, or a situation, that's the shadow speaking. Your job isn't to suppress the reaction, but to pause and ask, why did this affect me so strongly? And what is this moment showing me about myself? Conflicts with others are also shadow gold mines. In any argument, we tend to focus on how the other person is wrong or unfair. But if you step back and examine your part, your tone, your defensiveness, your assumptions, you may find your shadow hiding there. Are you reacting from pride, fear of vulnerability, or an old wound? Are you trying to control the situation to avoid feeling helpless or rejected? These moments of tension are not just problems to solve. They are mirrors reflecting your inner patterns. Another place the shadow hides is in blame. The more we blame others, the less responsibility we take for our own emotional landscape. When you catch yourself thinking, they always do this, or it's their fault I feel this way, it's worth asking, what am I avoiding in myself? This doesn't mean others aren't responsible for their actions. but your reaction is always yours. Shadow work asks you to take ownership of your emotions and to look for the root cause, not just the surface issue. Even daily annoyances can reveal the shadow. If laziness in others irritates you, ask if there's a part of you that also avoids work or feels guilty about resting. If someone's arrogance bothers you, check if you've been suppressing your own confidence out of fear of being judged. These aren't comfortable questions, but they're powerful ones. They shift your focus from criticizing others to understanding yourself. Another clue to the shadow is envy. When you feel jealous of someone's success, beauty, freedom, or creativity, that emotion can be painful, but it's also useful. Jung saw envy as a signal of untapped potential. If you're deeply bothered by someone's achievements, it may be because your shadow is holding a dream or desire you've buried. Instead of judging that person or yourself, ask, what do I see in them that I want for myself? That answer could lead you toward your next step of growth. Humor is another way the shadow sneaks in. Sarcasm, passive-aggressive jokes, or making fun of others can all be subtle expressions of repressed feelings. Watch what you joke about most often. It may reflect something you're uncomfortable owning directly. The same goes for the roles you play. Are you always the helper, the tough one, the smart one, the quiet one? These masks often hide parts of you that have been pushed into the shadow. The goal isn't to remove the shadow from your life. It's to build a relationship with it. When you get curious about your triggers and emotions, you begin turning those moments of discomfort into invitations for awareness. Instead of saying, "Why is this happening to me?" try asking, "What is this showing me about myself?" That simple shift changes everything. In daily life, shadow work doesn't mean overanalyzing every thought. It means being honest with yourself when emotions arise. It means having the courage to ask, what's really going on beneath this reaction? It means listening when your inner world speaks, especially through anger, shame, envy, fear, or insecurity. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Daily life is the classroom and your shadow is the teacher. Every trigger, every emotional response, every conflict is an invitation to learn more about who you are and who you have the potential to become. When people first hear about the shadow, they often think it's all negative, filled with shame, anger, fear, jealousy, or trauma. And yes, those parts are often buried there. But Carl Jung taught that the shadow doesn't just contain our darkness, it also contains our hidden gold. In fact, some of our greatest strengths, talents, and creative powers are hiding in the very places we've been taught to avoid. The shadow is not just a container of flaws, it's a vault of untapped potential. Why do these gifts end up in the shadow? Because many of us learn from a young age to conform to certain expectations. Maybe you were praised for being quiet, so you buried your boldness. Maybe you were rewarded for being helpful, so you suppressed your ambition. Or perhaps you were taught that creativity was childish, that emotions were weak, or that standing out was dangerous. Over time, these parts of you didn't disappear, they just went underground. Jung referred to this as the gold in the shadow. He believed that what we repress isn't always bad. It's just what didn't fit into our image of what's acceptable. So while the shadow may contain your fears, it also holds your courage. While it may hold your insecurities, it also holds your confidence. The shadow might even be home to your deepest wisdom, because real insight comes from knowing all parts of yourself, not just the polished ones. For example, someone who always tries to please others may have suppressed their assertiveness. That assertiveness, when recovered, can become a gift, helping them set boundaries, lead others, or speak their truth. A person who hides their sensitivity might discover that their empathy is actually a superpower. A man who has learned to hide his vulnerability might, through shadow work, find deep emotional intelligence and connection. These are not weaknesses, they are strengths that were simply hidden. Creativity also lives in the shadow. Jung believed that the unconscious mind is a source of rich symbolic material, images, emotions, and stories that can fuel art, writing, music, and innovation. This is why many artists, poets, and storytellers draw from their dreams, struggles, and inner conflicts. By facing their shadow, they tap into something raw and real. The more deeply you know yourself, the more original and powerful your self-expression becomes. Jung even explored this idea through the concept of individuation, which is the lifelong process of becoming your true self. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. That wholeness includes reclaiming the parts of you you've abandoned. When you do that, you gain not just insight, but energy. You feel more alive, more authentic, and more aligned with your inner purpose. Another hidden gift of the shadow is freedom. So many of us live under unconscious rules. I can't say that. I shouldn't want that. It's not okay to feel this way. These rules keep us small. But when we explore the shadow, we begin to challenge those inner limitations. We realize we're allowed to feel anger, desire, sadness, pride, and that doing so doesn't make us bad, it makes us human. That freedom creates space for personal power and choice. And there's also deep compassion to be found in the shadow. Once you've met your own darkness and shame, you stop being so quick to judge others. You see that everyone has a hidden world. Everyone carries wounds. Everyone wrestles with themselves. That understanding creates connection, humility, and kindness. It makes you a better friend, parent, partner, or leader because you lead with empathy, not ego. Ultimately, the shadow is not an enemy to be fought. It's a part of you that's been waiting to be seen. When you reject it, it controls you from the dark. But when you turn toward it, listen to it, and learn from it, it becomes your ally. It gives you strength, insight, and wholeness. As Jung said, the shadow is 90% pure gold. That means what you fear the most in yourself might be where your greatest gift lives. So instead of running from the parts of you that feel messy or uncomfortable, try asking, what power have I buried here? What truth wants to be remembered? The answer might surprise you. The very thing you thought made you broken could be the key to your brilliance. And the shadow, once seen, will guide you toward the most real, vibrant, and powerful version of who you truly are. The ultimate goal of shadow work isn't just to identify the parts of ourselves that we've hidden. It's to integrate them, to make them a conscious part of our whole being. Carl Jung described this process as a journey toward individuation, the lifelong process of becoming the person you were always meant to be. But individuation isn't just about personal growth, it's about accepting and uniting all aspects of yourself, including the parts you find difficult or uncomfortable. Integration of the shadow means that you no longer have to suppress or hide certain aspects of your personality. You don't have to wear masks or pretend to be something you're not. Instead, you embrace the fullness of your being. You stop being at war with yourself. You accept the light and the dark, the strengths and the weaknesses, the desires and the fears that live inside you. This doesn't mean you approve of every part of yourself or that you stop growing, but it means you stop rejecting your humanity. One of the most challenging aspects of this process is facing the negative aspects of your shadow. Those parts of you that are filled with shame, guilt, or fear. These might be moments from your past where you acted in ways you regret, or personality traits you were taught to suppress. It might be a deep-seated fear of being inadequate or unworthy. These parts are often the hardest to integrate because they're the most painful. But Jung believed that true healing comes only when we confront the things that scare us most, look them in the face, and accept that they are part of who we are. To integrate the shadow, you need to take responsibility for your own life, your own feelings, and your own actions. This means no longer blaming external circumstances or other people for the way you feel. Instead, you own your triggers, your responses, and your emotional reactions. You start to see that everything that happens in your life is a mirror, reflecting parts of you that need attention. And rather than being overwhelmed by them, you begin to approach them with curiosity and compassion. The first step in integration is awareness. By becoming conscious of the shadow, you've already begun the process. Once you see what's hiding in your unconscious mind, you can start to work with it. You can no longer ignore the ways your past has shaped your present. You can't unsee the patterns and the beliefs that have been limiting your growth. But that's not a burden, it's a blessing. Awareness gives you the power to choose. Instead of reacting out of old habits, you can now respond with intention. Next comes acceptance. This means making peace with the parts of yourself that are difficult or uncomfortable. For example, if you've spent years suppressing your anger, you need to accept that it's a natural emotion. You don't need to act on it destructively, but you can honor its presence and learn what it's trying to teach you. The same goes for all emotions and traits you've been avoiding, whether it's sadness, envy, or fear. Integration means giving yourself permission to be fully human without shame or self-judgment. The process of integration also involves taking action. It's not enough to just acknowledge your shadow. You need to bring it into your everyday life. This can be done by expressing emotions you've suppressed, setting boundaries you've ignored, or pursuing dreams you've kept hidden out of fear. By taking concrete steps to embrace the fullness of who you are, you begin to align your external life with your inner truth. Over time, as you continue the process of integrating the shadow, you start to experience a deep sense of inner peace. This doesn't mean you've fixed yourself or reached perfection. Instead, you've become more whole, more authentic, and more compassionate. You stop resisting who you are, and that resistance dissolves the internal conflict that drains your energy. You become free to live more fully and with greater purpose. Jung believed that integration of the shadow is not only personal, it's collective. When individuals become whole by embracing their shadows, they contribute to the healing of society as well. Our personal growth leads to more honest, authentic relationships. And by accepting our flaws, we create spaces for others to do the same. This creates a ripple effect of healing that can transform communities, cultures, and even the world. The integration of the shadow is not a destination. It's a continuous journey. Every time you face a new challenge, uncover a new layer of the unconscious, or heal an old wound, you integrate more of your true self. And with each step, you become more fully alive. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Integration is the path that takes you there, not through denial or repression, but through acceptance, curiosity, and courage. So as you move forward on your journey, remember that your shadow is not something to fear.